Hello, friends. Western experts are concerned about the loss of stability of this group. Refusal to retreat to the second line of defense has already led to the formation of a cauldron from which it is currently impossible to escape to the Kharkiv-Dnipropetrovsk line. Further pinning down of enemy forces on the occupied lines will inevitably end in disaster. This is logical, we have been talking about this for a long time. But the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine today announced that Ukrainian troops are repelling enemy attacks near Avdiivka, near the village of Verkhnetoretskoye, and recognized the bypass of the city from the north. The village of Verkhnetoretskoye covers the strategic highway Konstantinovka-Donetsk. Meanwhile, British intelligence reports that Russia has made progress in the south of Mariupol, where fierce fighting continues. Quote, in the near future, the Russians will increase their missile strikes to the maximum at different points. Their task is to show that there is no place in this country where you can be safe, and this is one of the key tasks at this moment in the psychological part of the war, said the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Kiev regime. He is slightly mistaken, this is not a psychological war, this is the destruction of infrastructure and fuel supplies for the armed forces of the Kiev regime. Ukrainian media write that near Is.yum. On March 24, Ukrainian air defense shot down a Russian Su-35, well, firstly, not ours, but yours, and, secondly, not on March 24, but 2 weeks ago. According to the Kiev regime, the 250th plane or helicopter was shot down today, they never figured it out, the Russian armed forces. But Zelensky declares that the Russians still have a lot of military vehicles that go and go. Quote, there are cities where there are so many tanks that tank jams form. And it is completely incomprehensible because the Kiev regime said that both missiles and equipment and everything else were already running out 2 weeks ago. It was reported that the Russians were raking out the last stocks of the strategic reserve. Another daily summary of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which provides very interesting news. Firstly, the enemy is blowing up bridges in a number of settlements, strengthening the defense, and immediately it follows that the enemy in the Izyum region is regrouping and replenishing ammunition in order to resume the campaign against Slavyansk. It seems that yesterday and the day before yesterday they did not attack Slavyansk. In the Lugansk region, the Russians still do not have control over the entire territory of the village of Rubin. It is reported that fighting is taking place on the southern outskirts of the city. In the Donetsk region, it is reported about the assault on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the outskirts of the city of New York. That is, there is a movement towards the position of the armed forces of Ukraine near the settlement of Horlivka. Attempts are being made to take up positions to storm the settlement of Ugledar, to which the troops are approaching from the direction of the settlement of Volnovaki. Thank you for acknowledging the obvious. And, finally, in Mariupol, the enemy continues to advance towards the city center and the fire defeat of the position of Ukrainian troops. Numerous Russian troops entered the pier in the Kherson region, a local deputy said, but mind you, they entered only today. But the German newspaper Bild took care to preserve the rights of prisoners of war and showed footage of the massacre of Russian prisoners of war, accompanying them with the phrase that Putin's war is getting worse. We have heard this before, Hitler burned people in crematoria, and Stalin was to blame. Meanwhile, Baden-Württemberg Minister of Agriculture Peter Hawk in all seriousness urged the Germans to freeze to the evil of the Russians. Quote, we need to turn off the gas and oil taps so that the freedom of Europe has a chance. 15 degrees in winter can be experienced in a sweater, no one will die from this. Just keep in mind that the EU remains dependent on Russian energy at least up to 27 years, and these are not my words. This was announced today at a briefing in Brussels by the official representative of the European Commission, Kim Mackful. Well, Putin instructed the government from April 1 to ensure the sale of gas exclusively for rubles. As I understand it, they will still have time to pay in dollars and euros for March, but from April 1, payment will be made in rubles. Meanwhile, in Odessa they are selling humanitarian aid from Poland, and exactly the same canned goods have already appeared on the black market in Nikolaev. And the Turks discovered another drifting mine off the coast of Bulgaria. Now it has been destroyed. Another news from abroad. Any military intervention in Armenia will lead to an immediate response of the Iranian armed forces, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps reported. Well, return to the torture and humiliation of prisoners, let me remind you that this is a long tradition of our now no longer partners. Charles XII had such a general Renschild, it was he who in 1706 ordered the destruction of Russian prisoners of war, among whom, by the way, were many Germans. They were offered move aside, but they said they would not move away, they are Russians, but how it ended is understandable. So modern Europeans should be no less honest than General Renschild, he at least, honestly said that he did not consider Russian people and did not hiding behind the words about democracy. And the latest news. The former acting director of the CIA in an interview with CNN said the quote, "We should not underestimate the willingness of Russians to endure pain. Their entire history is proof of this. For the sake of victory, they are ready to endure a lot and for a long time." Fighting second, the Chechen war lasted 10 months, and in total the Russians were transported 8 years. In Syria too, everything was not fast, so they are ready to endure. We are here on West, can't even imagine how long. And we can, until victory. That's all the best to you, goodbye.